She raised the mug, demanded my money, and chose violence. I stepped into the cold, burned broke. And finally paying attention, the house behind me was already being sold without my consent. The mug was already in her hand when I realized the conversation was over. Her grip tight, her arms stiff, her eyes flat in a way that told me this was not emotion but decision. She said, "Give my son your credit card or get out." Her voice steady, practiced, like she had rehearsed it while I was asleep. I felt something tighten in my chest, not fear yet. More like disbelief settling into place. I told her no again, calm, clear. The way you do when you think reason still matters. I said I would not hand over my finances. I said I would not fund another mistake. I looked at her waiting for a pause, a breath. Anything that said this was still a marriage and not a standoff. But she moved instead, fast and deliberate. The coffee came at me in a hot arc, hitting my shoulder and chest, soaking through cotton, burning deep and immediate. The sound came first. A sharp hiss, ugly and final, like something dying in a pan. I gasped, more from shock than pain. The mug shattered on the tile. Pieces skidding under the table, steam rising from my shirt. And in that moment, I understood something important. This was not an argument that got out of hand. This was a line she was willing to cross. I stood there longer than I should have, staring down at myself, watching the fabric darken, feeling my skin tighten and throb, my heart pounding slow and heavy. Her voice kept going, loud now, accusing, telling me I was selfish, telling me I was forcing her hand, telling me family comes first. I looked past her to her son at the table, his eyes on his phone, his mouth curled just slightly. Not surprised, not alarmed, waiting to see what I would do. That look hurt more than the burn, because it told me this was expected, rehearsed, maybe even planned. I realized then that staying would not calm anything down. It would only teach them how far they could push me next time. I nodded once, not in agreement but in acceptance. I said, "Okay." I said, "I am leaving." My voice sounded far away to my own ears. I went to the hallway closet, grabbed my jacket, my keys, my wallet, my lockbox from the top shelf, the one with paperwork I never quite trusted anyone else to handle. No one tried to stop me. That told me everything. Outside the air was sharp and cold, the March wind biting into my wet shirt, turning the burn into something fierce and alive. I sat in my truck with my hands on the wheel, breathing slow, letting the pain anchor me to the moment. I did not cry. I did not yell. I just sat there understanding that whatever I thought this marriage was, it had already changed. I drove away without looking back. The house shrinking in my mirror, lights still on inside like nothing had happened. And as the pain settled into a steady throb, another thought followed close behind, quiet but heavy. If she was willing to hurt me to protect him, then she had already chosen a side, and I was no longer standing on it. The clinic smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. A cruel detail I could not ignore. The nurse peeled my shirt back slowly, her breath catching before she said anything. The skin on my shoulder was already angry red, blistering at the edges, pulsing like it had its own heartbeat. She asked what happened, a voice careful, neutral, trained not to assume. I hesitated longer than I should have, because saying it out loud made it real in a way the pain had not yet managed. I told her my wife threw hot coffee on me. The words felt strange in my mouth, like I was describing someone else's life, not mine. She nodded once, wrote something down, then told me quietly this counted as a domestic incident. She asked if I wanted photos taken, for my records, for my protection. That word stuck with me, protection. I lay back and stared at the ceiling tiles while she worked. Each click of the camera sounded louder than it should have. Each flash felt like proof being sealed into place. I realized then that pain fades. but records do not. When I stepped back outside, my phone vibrated in my hand, a bank notification. Short and polite and terrifying. Request to add authorized user. Her son's name. My stomach dropped. My hand started to shake, not from the burn but from clarity. This had not been a heat of the moment demand. This had been lined up, timed, waiting for pressure to do its job. I sat in my truck and opened my banking app. Every login felt heavier than the last. Charges stared back at me that I did not recognize. Small amounts designed not to scream, just to whisper until it was too late. Cash advances, fees, subscriptions with names that meant nothing to me. All of it traced back to my card, my credit, my future. I leaned my head against the steering wheel and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for years. I was not dealing with a family disagreement. I was dealing with a slow theft. I drove to a parking lot and sat there with a cup of ice water pressed against my shoulder, watching people come and go like the world had not tilted on its axis. I made one call to an old friend who knew how to listen without fixing things too fast. When I told him what happened, he did not interrupt. He just said, "You can stay here." That was enough. Later that night on his recliner, the burn itching under fresh bandages, sleep coming in short, broken stretches, a memory surfaced that would not let go. My wife at the kitchen table months earlier. Papers spread out, telling me it was just in case. Just to protect us. I remembered signing, trusting, not reading as closely as I should have. I stared at the ceiling in the dark and understood something that made my chest feel hollow. Being thrown out hurt, being burned hurt, but the real damage had started long before the coffee ever left the mug. By morning, the shaking had settled into something colder. Steadier, I sat at the small table in my friend's basement. Laptop open, coffee untouched, the smell alone turning my stomach. I logged into every account I had. One by one, moving slow, forcing myself not to rush. Because rushing was how mistakes happened. The numbers told a story I did not want but could not ignore. Withdrawals I never made, small enough to slide under notice. Stacked together like termites eating a beam from the inside. Subscriptions for betting apps and rush loans. Charges landing at odd hours when I was asleep. Everyone tied back to my name, my credit, my address. I felt a tight pressure behind my eyes, not tears, just strain. This was not need. This was strategy. Someone had been testing limits, measuring how far they could go before I noticed. And now that I had said no, the pressure had escalated. I clicked deeper, slower now, letting the facts speak without emotion. There it was, a payday loan, his name on the application, my information everywhere else, phone number, address. Financial trail bent just enough to pass automated checks. My jaw clenched. Because this was no longer about helping someone down on their luck. This was about using my stability as collateral for his collapse. I leaned back and closed my eyes, letting the truth settle. He did not want guidance. He wanted access. And access had already been granted somewhere along the way. My phone rang. Her name lit the screen. I answered because avoidance felt like fear, and I was done with that. She did not ask if I was hurt. She said I provoked her, said I embarrassed him, said I should come home and be reasonable. When he jumped down the line, mocking, accusing, rewriting history in real time. I listened. Then I ended the call, quietly, cleanly, because nothing useful lived on the other side of that conversation. An hour later, I sat across from a bank manager with calm eyes and steady hands. Someone who had seen this before, even if I wish she had not. I laid out the facts, the burn, the demands, the charges. She did not rush me. She did not judge me. She just nodded and said we stopped the bleeding first. Fraud alerts went up. Cards were shut down. Passwords changed. Access rerouted. My pension redirected into an account only I could touch. Each step felt like reclaiming ground, inch by inch. She told me protecting myself was not abandonment. It was responsibility. Those words followed me out into the cold air. Because for the first time since that morning, I felt something return that I thought I had lost. Control. And I understood that patience was not passive. It was preparation. The lawyer's office sat above a closed storefront, quiet in a way that made you lower your voice without thinking. My shoulder throbbed as I climbed the stairs. Each step a reminder that injuries linger even when the shouting stops. She listened without interrupting, pen moving only when it needed to. Her questions precise, not emotional. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "We slowed this down." Panic creates leverage, and I would not give them any more of that. She spread the paperwork across her desk, deeds, bank statements, trust documents my wife had insisted on after my injury. Said it was to protect us if something happened to me. I remembered how reasonable it had sounded at the time, how tired I had been, how easy it was to trust someone who shared your bed. She slid one page forward and tapped it with her pen. "This amendment changes everything," she said. My stomach tightened as I leaned in. The signature was mine, but something felt wrong. The ink was blue, not black. A small detail that carried more weight than it should have. I always signed in black, always. She nodded like she had been waiting for that answer. The witness line told another story, not a notary, not neutral. Someone connected to her son. My jaw clenched. Because this was no misunderstanding. This was pressure applied at the right moment, when pain and fear made me compliant. She explained it plainly. Undue influence. Not a guarantee, but a door. One that stayed closed without patience and proof. I felt the urge to push, to demand, to force things back into place, and I swallowed it. Because force was how I ended up burned in the first place. She laid out the path forward slow and clear. Legal separation to establish standing. An emergency motion tied to the assault and coercion. A request to freeze changes until a judge could look at everything in daylight. This was not revenge, she said. This was containment. I nodded even though my chest felt hollow. I told her my wife was scared, that she was trying to protect her son from drowning. The lawyer did not argue with that. She just said fear explains behavior, but it does not excuse it. As I left her office, the weight shifted again, away from emotion and toward structure. And for the first time, I understood that the most dangerous fights are not loud. They are quiet, fought with paper, dates and signatures, and once they start, you do not win by shouting. You win by waiting and letting the truth stay intact. Things started moving without raising their voices, which was the most unsettling part. Filings went in, motions were stamped. Orders drafted while I sat in borrowed quiet. My name suddenly carrying weight again because it was attached to dates and facts. Not arguments. The lawyer told me not to engage. Not to explain. Not to defend myself to anyone who did not have authority to decide anything. That advice went against every instinct I had. But I followed it because instinct had already failed me once. Within days, an emergency order was issued. Temporary, procedural, unemotional, it did not punish anyone. It simply set boundaries that could not be crossed without consequences. And for the first time since the coffee hit my skin, I felt the ground stop shifting under my feet. I did not see it happen. I heard about it later through her voice, high and breaking over the phone, saying there was a man in the house. A stranger with a clipboard, telling her she needed to step back, asking her to inventory rooms she thought she controlled. She kept asking me what I had done, like the paperwork had materialized on its own. I asked her what kind of man he was. She said calm, too calm. Like he did not care how loud she got. That detail told me everything. Calm only works when authority is behind it. The property manager was not there for feelings. He was there for the house. And houses only answer to paper, not volume. When her son stormed in demanding explanations, the man told him he was not on the deed, not on the trust, not on the utilities. The words landed heavier than any insult could have. When she called back crying, saying I had embarrassed her, blindsided her, involved strangers, I listened until she ran out of breath. Then I reminded her quietly that she had thrown coffee on me and told me to get out. There was a long pause, the kind that usually fills with denial. But this one stayed empty. I told her I had not brought strangers into our lives. I had just stopped pretending they were not already there. After the call, I sat in the silence and understood the shift had completed. Power had moved without shouting, without threats. Just by letting the system do what it does when you finally let it see clearly. Patience had turned into leverage, and leverage had turned into distance they could no longer close. The backlash did not come from where I expected. It came softly, wrapped in concern. Delivered through people who thought they were helping. My phone lit up with familiar names, family, church friends, neighbors who had never asked me how I was doing before. All of them repeating the same version of the story. That I had walked out, that I had overreacted, that she was scared and confused. I listened to the voicemails without responding, because every one of them asked why I would do this to her. Not what had been done to me. Silence felt heavy, but explaining myself to people who already chose a side felt heavier. I went to the diner one morning and felt the temperature drop when I walked in. Conversations thinning, I sliding away too quickly. A man I had known for decades shook his head and said he never thought I would treat my wife like that. I nodded and paid my bill, because correcting him would not change his mind. It would only give him something new to misunderstand. Restraint started to feel like a second injury. Unseen but constant, I understood then why people cave. Why they apologize for things they did not do. Why they go back to unsafe situations just to stop the noise. The pressure was not coming from anger. It was coming from disappointment. From people who wanted the story to end neatly so they could be comfortable again. That night, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from her son. His voice stretched thin, mocking, promising to ruin me. To make me sorry, I did not delete it. I forwarded it to my lawyer without comment. She replied with one sentence. Let him keep talking. That was when it clicked. Public opinion shifts with emotion. But consequences move with evidence. Every message, every threat, every lie added weight to a scale I did not have to hold up myself. All I had to do was stay quiet and let gravity work. And for the first time since this started, the isolation felt less like punishment and more like protection. Pressure does strange things to people who are used to shortcuts. It makes them sloppy. It makes them loud. I started noticing signs I would have missed before. A credit alert here, a notice there. Attempts to move fast before doors fully closed. My lawyer kept telling me the same thing. Do not respond. Document everything. Let the pattern finish forming. Her son left another voicemail. Then another, each one sharper than the last. Threats layered with desperation. Promises he could not back up. I listened once, then archived them all, because hearing his voice did nothing but stir old instincts. Instincts that wanted to fix what could not be fixed. A neighbor I barely spoke to stop my friend one afternoon and mentioned seeing him in the driveway days earlier. Talking to a man in a cheap suit, papers exchanging hands. Voices low but urgent. That detail stuck, not because it was dramatic, but because it was consistent. Later that same day, another credit application pinged my phone. Denied this time. The system finally catching up. The pieces lined up without effort. He was no longer chasing my credit card. He was chasing the house, chasing equity, chasing time he no longer had. Desperation had moved him from quiet theft into public mistakes. Exactly where patience does the most damage. I sat in that basement again that night, shoulder itching under healing skin, thinking about how loud I could have been, how much noise I could have made, and how little it would have helped. Instead, I forwarded one more message, one more alert, and waited. Because this part was not about proving I was right. It was about letting him show exactly who he was when pressure stripped the mask away. And as the evidence stacked itself neatly into place, I understood something simple and sobering. People who threaten ruin are usually already standing in it. They just want company. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in feeling. Wood benches worn smooth by years of waiting. The air smelling faintly of disinfectant and paper. I sat still with my hands folded, heart beating slow and heavy. While he walked in wearing a cheap suit that did not quite fit, the tag still tucked under one cuff. He tried to lean against the wall like confidence could be borrowed. A bailiff cleared his throat and told him to stand clear. The flush crept up his neck, and I saw it then. This room did not care who he thought he was. It cared only about what could be proven. Inside the courtroom, my lawyer spoke without raising her voice. No stories, no emotion, just dates, photos, statements, bank records. The burn documented from every angle, the altered trust, the witness connection, the voicemails, the attempted credit moves, the inventory from the property manager. Each piece placed carefully where it belonged. He tried to interrupt once. The judge lifted a hand and silenced him with a look. When his turn came, there was nothing new to say, only repetition and excuses. And those do not carry weight in a room built for facts. The orders came down steady and clear. Freezes, restrictions, boundaries written in ink that does not argue back. In the hallway afterward, my wife broke down, crying that she did not think it would go this far, that she thought it would be temporary. I looked at her and saw fear, regret, and exhaustion tangled together. I told her I had asked her to stop. I told her she told me to leave. When she reached for my arm and noticed the bandage, her face folded in on itself. The apology came then, quiet and late. I stepped back. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. Some consequences arrive after the moment for fixing things is past. And the courtroom emptied around us without ceremony. The way truth often does, leaving only distance where noise used to be. She waited by the doors like someone unsure where to stand, twisting a tissue until it tore. When our eyes met, she said my name the way she used to when she needed help. Not forgiveness, just relief. She told me she was sorry, that she never meant to hurt me, that fear made her do terrible math. I listened without interrupting because this was not a negotiation anymore. It was a confession arriving after the damage was done. I told her I believed she was scared. I told her I believed she loved her son. But belief was not the same as trust, and trust was the thing that had burned away first. She asked if we could start over, her voice small, careful, like she was afraid of breaking something else. The question hung between us heavy and unfinished. I thought about the coffee, the demand, the paperwork I signed when I was hurt and tired, the silence when her son smirked at the table. Starting over would mean pretending those moments did not exist, and I could not do that anymore. I told her I needed quiet, not answers, not promises. Just space where no one was asking me to give something up to keep the peace. She nodded like she already knew that was coming, like she had been bracing for it. As she walked away alone down the courthouse steps, I felt something settle instead of break. Not victory, not satisfaction, just acceptance. Some apologies come from regret, not change. And change is the only thing that earns another chance. I watched her disappear into the crowd and understood that loving someone does not mean standing still while they harm you. Sometimes it means stepping back far enough to let consequences reach them without your body in the way. And that distance, painful as it is, can be the most honest answer you have left. The house was quiet when I unlocked the door. quieter than it had ever been with him inside. The air smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaner, familiar and strange at the same time. I stood there longer than necessary, key still in my hand, letting the silence prove it was real. I walked room to room slowly, touching the back of a chair, the edge of the counter, things I had fixed and paid for without ever thinking they might disappear. In the kitchen, the broken mug was gone, replaced by a plain white one, clean and empty. I stared at it and felt the last of the adrenaline drain away. What was left was not anger. It was relief. That night I slept in my own bed, the mattress creaking like it always had, my shoulder tugging when I rolled over, reminding me that healing does not erase memory. In the morning, I went to the diner, same booth, same waitress. She set down my plate and said, "Rough week." I nodded and smiled small. A couple of men stopped by the table. No speeches, no questions, just nods. A hand on my shoulder, acknowledgement without judgment. That mattered more than being proven right ever could. I will not tell you everything fixed itself. It did not. Paper can protect the house, but it cannot rebuild trust. Some nights the quiet feels too big. Some mornings, the smell of coffee still makes my stomach tighten. But I learned something at 58 that I wish I had learned earlier. Love does not get to cost your dignity. Family does not get to drain your accounts and call it help. And patience is not weakness when it is paired with evidence. If you ever have to walk away quietly to save yourself, know this: choosing safety over silence is not cruel. It is honest, and sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stop explaining and let the truth speak on its own.